Happy Thursday. Welcome in another edition of Organized Real Estate. Clint Skutchan with T360. Today we've got a nice panel, so we'll go around the room here to have some introductions with so many folks being in the room, but talking about mergers and acquisitions today, which is always a fun one, and one that we've been honestly getting a lot more interest in over the last couple of months. Seems to, again, there's kind of a wave of these happening, so we figured it was a good time to discuss this. So I'm going to go around the room, have each of you introduce yourself, let us know where you're from, and then I want you to share this one with me as an icebreaker here. What's your response to the saying, patience is a virtue? And AnneMarie, I think I'll start with you, please.
Well, since I have an 18-year-old, that patience is a virtue rang with me. So say no more. So I'm AnneMarie DeCatsye, and I'm the CEO of Canopy Realtor Association, as well as Canopy MLS, and we're in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Great. Megan, let's come to you next, please.
Well, I have a senior as well, so it is a virtue that I am definitely working on as well. And I am Megan Foos. I am the CEO of Northwest Ohio Realtors and NORIS MLS.
Excellent. And George, last as they say, but not least.
Hello, everyone. Jorge Ledesma. I am the CEO of Greater Bergen Realtors, and we are located in northern New Jersey.
What's your response to that whole patience is a virtue thing?
It is a daily mantra for myself.
As a reminder, or you're actually good at it?
I think it's more as a twofold, a little bit, but then also a bit of an understanding that there is a bit of a light at the end of the tunnel. You just kind of have to go with it day by day, one day at a time.
Yeah, I like you two ladies, I survived the senior year last year in the midst of the pandemic, and so I've got a freshman in college this year. So yeah, that's that whole thing we've all learned. If you had kids through this, that patience piece and going back to school yourself has really tested it. So yeah, feel you on that one. Reason we start with that is that we're talking about mergers and acquisitions, and really these things, you have to have a great degree of patience around them, because in many instances there are decades in the making. Not kidding here. So let's talk a little bit about your kind of your origin story, or your abbreviated origin story, as it were, around some of. And I think in a couple instances, a couple of you have had a few go arounds on different mergers that have occurred over time. But what brought about your mergers, and or Marie, for you, AnneMarie, you can talk about the acquisitions piece as well. But kind of what's the origin story there? And Megan, I might start with you. And again, I think you have a couple of instances that you could talk to.
Yeah, we've actually done three. The first one was about a year and a half after I started, about 2011. When we started, we were one county. Now we're 10. So the area's been a little bit different. Some we started because we had a shared service agreement in place. One was a completely volunteer-driven organization, so we were just doing more of their board. They were a member of the MLS, so that one kind of happened very organically. And then in they were both official in January of 2020. We merged with a neighboring association who, in all fairness, probably was on the border of not meeting core standards. They were MLS participants of ours, and many had become secondary members. So that association actually just kind of dissolved, and we inherited their members. And at the same time, in about 2018, the CEO of the Heartland Realtors here in Ohio, I know there's two, retired. And instead of hiring a CEO, they actually contracted with us to have me as their CEO. They had their own MLS, they had staff, they had a building. And after about 2 years of trying to run two associations, I looked at my board and said, I can't do it anymore. And we kind of gave them the option to merge with us or to find a CEO. And luckily, the merging with us kind of was a better idea. And so each one obviously was very different. Each one looked different. Each one has turned out differently. And we're all kind of in the holding pattern of making everything kind of COVID 3 months later didn't help bring everyone together to feel like one association. I think that's probably what our biggest challenge is at the moment. But everyone is very different and kind of turned out a little bit different the way it looked.
Yeah, I want to talk about that culture creation piece down the road here, because it's a difficult and yet uniquely important component of all of this. George, tell us a little bit about kind of, again, your origin story. How did your merger come about?
Yeah, definitely. So our association went merger that was finalized and started as of 2019. However, prior to that, this dates back early 90s, I would even say. There were conversations between these two boards essentially that had happened. And one particular company actually here in the North was a really small board and less than 500 members. And they sort of really were, to Megan's point, not able to continue to move forward with core standards. So around that time, it kind of became an open conversation with one of the previous associations and that really small board to just sort of acquire them and roll into them so that they can continue to have the resources that's required for the membership as needed. And then in 2019 or in 2018, I would say, the two previous leaders of both previous associations really got together, sat down, and I want to say it was probably like the third or fourth go around about having these conversations and trying to find a way to mutually get together and find a way to have this new association come about. And we were successful at it in 2018, where the new association launched, Greater Bergen Realtors, starting as of 2019. But the history is that conversation that was going on for probably over 2 decades, right? In terms of trying to put the pieces in place, trying to get the right people in the right seats to really help facilitate this consolidation that we really coined as becoming one. And thankfully, everyone was envisioning a new future with new standards and looking to elevate what previous associations had. So it made sense to come together at that time. And we've been working ever since. I don't think there's been a day off since that consolidation has happened that we've taken to continue to build on.
Well, I know a little bit about your behind the scenes and your additional patience pieces that you guys have been doing a building, which a building can be a really interesting component of mergers as well. So I want to come back to that here later on and talk about that. AnneMarie, you've got, I think, a couple of different instances, and I'm really curious because one instance goes back literally a few decades to now, more current. And I'm curious as to kind of your origin stories. Are they same over time, or were they different reasons and rationales in the the timeframes that they occurred?
Well, I'm glad to hear Megan talk about everyone is kind of different, because I think every situation is different and you have to go into it with that mindset. So our history is we had the same association jurisdiction as MLS service area all the way up until the late 80s. And then we started, I guess, either acquiring or folding in the immediately surrounding counties to our county, the main county, Mecklenburg, where Charlotte is. And those outlying counties really are like our founding counties. And that was between 88 and 94. And we didn't acquire or do anything more until 2015. So it was a big stretch of time. And that's when we started wholesaling to the mountains, which North Carolina Mountain MLS, which was owned by 3 realtor associations. And ultimately they came to us a year and a half into the wholesaling and said, how about you just acquire us? So that happened over a 2-year period of time. And then we had 5 more MLS acquisitions, basically between 2018 and 2020. So that's on the acquisition side. On the merger side, we've only had 2. And one occurred in 1995 before I got here, and it was not well communicated. It wasn't well explained. It was a very much us versus them mentality when I came 6 years later. So we really had to work on that relationship of saying, no, you're part of us. It's just literally the county north of us. So we did not have another association merger until 2019. So it's been a while, and it was one of the associations that came out of the acquisition of the North Carolina Mountain MLS. But interestingly, it's a very small association. It's over 2 hours away from here, so they're not contiguous. And sounds like you, Megan, it became effective in January of 2020. So COVID didn't really help as far as allowing us to really get involved as much as we wanted to. So.
Yeah, no, and I've heard that kind of in a number of instances where either, mergers have occurred or just significant changes and changeover in leadership, at an executive level in particular, where executive have been there 20, 30 years and all those things, trigger these changes, mass changes to kind of organizational culture. And it's been really hard to address that through these distance related service delivery, not only just to the general members, but the camaraderie that can be built amongst the key decision makers. And that ultimately goes a long way towards, starting to see yourself as a singular organization, as how those leaders see and feel about that. What, in your kind of from your own personal assessments, how did you view mergers or acquisitions prior to having participated in one? And has that become different since going through one? And let me start here. George, I'll come back to you. What was kind of your sense about mergers before versus what you know today?
Two different worlds, I would say. I think like everyone is saying here, I want to echo that every single, whether it's an acquisition or a merger, is unique. It's its own case. And I think that has to do with the history, that has to do with the personnel, the culture, all that takes into perspective when you're coming together. And prior to myself being a part of it, you kind of just realize, all right, it's work. You have to put in time and you have to put in resources and you have to really get a game plan in set so that you can see it through. But it's like those, you always reference sports, I think, in my mind. There's all these little things that are done behind the scenes that have such big impacts, and you don't realize it until you start going through some of them. When you go through a merger and or acquisition, you realize that communication obviously is crucial, but a lot of the little things that you can do can really pay some big dividends down the line. And it really is about understanding how these two are going to come together. And what is the end goal? I mean, an acquisition is completely different than a merger in my point of view, and it's handled differently as well. And for myself, coming out of the merger, you realize that not only is it a lot of work, but you have to have the buy-in from everyone. And the buy-in is easier said than done, because when you're bringing together two associations or two companies or two cultures, let's say, you have different mindsets and perspectives. So what one association may think as a priority, the other one may not. And so now as you're trying to come together and you're trying to grow as one, you kind of have to find a way to balance everything out, but then also put everything in perspective. The new association, what's priority? How can we move forward from it? I would definitely say that, again, not going through one and after going through one, it's like day and night. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. It may not be, thankfully, if anyone's gone through a merger, you saw that light in a matter of days or months, God bless. And if you haven't, and you've gone through a merger or a situation where, it really is an uphill battle in a sense, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And I think, like anything, when you're putting hard work into it and when everyone's on the same page and you're looking for something much better and you're looking at the real true end goal, that really can help get you to a better place and get you through those tough patches.
I know we've got some folks who are watching. Feel free to use the chat section to share any of your experiences and lessons that you've learned if you've been a part of that, or maybe questions that you might have about it if it's something that's being considered in your part of the world. So just throw those in the chat, or if you have any questions, we'll monitor those as well and answer those as we can. AnneMarie, kind of your thoughts, on that perspective. And again, as I was pointed out by George, is there's kind of probably two different mindsets around a merger versus an acquisition. And how did you view them before you were a part of them versus now having gone through a couple different versions?
I guess I probably didn't realize how different they were. And we were fortunate that every MLS that we acquired from a realtor association, that association came to us. So we weren't going to them except for one. There was just one exception. And that one had kind of been going back and forth for, I would say, a good 20 years. So that was the outlier. And so it made it easier for us with them approaching us and on the acquisition side. And it's a lot less complicated. So we did a lot of the negotiation directly with the leadership of those associations that were selling us their MLS. But when we went to do the merger, it really kind of surprised me how complicated it is from a legal standpoint. And not only do you need to know your state law and your bylaws, but you also got to include NAR. So it just kind of took a longer time. And there were a lot more I's to dot and T's to cross when we were actually doing a merger. So I'm glad we did it with a small association because it was a good test run for us. And we definitely learned a lot. So.
Megan, before I come to you, I want to do a follow-up with AnneMarie. Talk a little bit about, I think the merger piece too becomes more of a politicized process than a business negotiation that you might find, especially where someone's approaching you in an acquisition. Can you talk about the differences in those two and what you felt it meant for the expedience and the different approaches?
Well, so for a merger to occur, the acquiring association and the one that's being merged have to have membership votes. And you don't necessarily have to have that on the acquisition side, although I think the associations that were giving up or selling their MLSs had to have the membership vote. We didn't have to have one on that side. We did on the merger side. And it does kind of pose a lot of questions, especially we had our first membership meeting since 2003. Because we changed our bylaws to say that the board could make changes to the bylaws. We never had a need for a membership meeting. So it was sort of like, why are we doing this? Why are we merging with them? They're 2 hours away. But at the same time, the association that was merging into us was excited to be part of a bigger entity. We have a fairly sophisticated 501c3 foundation, and they really looked at us as a means to using whatever reserves they had to support housing initiatives in their county, which is a fairly poor county. So that was a driver for them. So I think even though they're 2 hours away, they're in the mountains, we shared the same culture. And I think that's what ended up making it work. But it did take a lot longer than the acquisitions.
Yeah.
If I may.
Yeah, go ahead, George.
So
And then I'll come to
Anne's point, if I may, to Anne's point, you're so right about dotting crossing the T's, dotting the I's, because as you come out from a merger standpoint anyways, with a new association, there's a learning curve, right? You're not going through what Association X used to do or Association Y used to do. There's a learning curve of all right, bylaws are important, your policies are important, but it's also a new documents for both. If both bylaws, associations are new. So there's that learning curve that you're coming out of and trying to understand, all right, well, it needs to be done this way. And why is the reason? So you're always explaining to the membership. You're always trying to get that message out to the membership. And I think it's a big learning curve for everyone. And I think you can probably speak to this. It's a learning curve for not only the membership, but for the board of directors. It's a learning curve for the staff. We are looked at to have all the answers. And by all means, we're always looking to have the right answers and the resources, but it's a learning curve for us as well. And when you're coming out of a merger, you're trying to make sure that you've got everything done correctly and you're moving everything forward as it needs to be. But hey, that's also year one of the new company. That's also year two. You're not going to get everything right in year one. You're learning from that. And I think that's really important to kind of understand. A lot of it is in the details as well.
Yeah.
And how about you? Sorry, go ahead, AnneMarie.
Well, year one being COVID was not exactly helpful, which it sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all found difficulties in communicating through that. Megan, how about you just going in, initial thoughts on your view of what mergers looked like versus having gone through them, what the other side looked like?
What I didn't realize at the beginning was how personal they were to, especially the other association, and what the leadership might thought was important, maybe the membership thought was a difference of importance. So really going in with no preconceived ideas of how it was going to look and really just kind of listening to figure out the balance. I will say the last one we did was particularly challenging because I was the CEO of both associations. So trying to keep that neutral party, trying to keep the sense of confidence between both associations and kind of knowing where each association wanted to go, but knowing that they had to get them themselves was a particular challenge. And I don't know, I think maybe if I had to do that again, I probably would bring in a consultant just because a lot of times I found myself stuck in the middle between all of my members in that particular situation. But they really do, what what you think going in is going to be important with them, whether that's what they do with their extra resources or having a seat on the board or however that looks, a lot of times is not what's important to them, or it may be important to 3 members and 5 members want to do this, and trying to build that consensus and really kind of figure out what it looks like, I think was the biggest challenge for us, is managing, like everything, it's managing the members.
You hit on a point I think that is oftentimes underestimated, is how personal this becomes for those that have been engaged for a period of time, that see kind of their own personal legacy attached to a certain organization, past presidents, you know, what happens there. How do you, in your experiences, and I'll just throw this out to all 3 of you, how did you address that? And what do you do, again, because you've got multiple sides in most instances trying to figure that out? How do you get the personal aspect out of it and refocus on the business aspects and the value proposition?
If I could just follow up with that, I think it's really hard because a lot of times they're smaller associations, and I don't know that you do, to be honest. I think you just roll with it and you manage it the best they can, because so many times, and I am a firm believer, there is a huge value in smaller associations if they have the ability to provide the services, because they are more connected a lot of times as a group because they see each other all the time, and they're working together, more transactions than necessarily members of a larger association. And so that sense of identity and that loss of, hey, I can just call someone up in the office and right, wrong, or indifferent, I want this change. And guess what? Now we have a new MLS rule that hasn't gone through a committee or any other process. And that doesn't happen in a bigger association. That loss of identity and that loss of control is really, really hard. And I don't know that you actually can get over it until, and this is where obviously we've struggled through COVID, until you really get to start working and getting, whether you're going down to them and having events in their area or bringing them up here, because now they have to drive an hour to come to events versus 5 minutes when it's right around the corner. And so to get past that, it's still personal. It's still a year and a half later, us versus them. It's still their association. And again, COVID hasn't helped, not meeting in person hasn't helped, but I don't know that you actually get over it. I think it's, like George said, we're working it 3 years later, it's still working it. And it's just a continuous process that I think sometimes time is the only thing that really can help get through that.
I see a lot of nodding heads. Anyone want to jump in on that one?
Well, we ended up hiring the former AE of the association that merged into us, and that was really important to them. And she's great, and it was sort of like I would have, asked for it if they hadn't asked for it, because everybody in the community up there knows her. So that helped with a continuity standpoint. But I totally agree with Megan. This is a personal issue. Our members are people person. They have their own culture and in each market area. And I think we all have to be sensitive to that. We're Charlotte, the big city, but when we were approached, even to acquire on the MLS side, we were super sensitive to not use the word Charlotte, to just talk about our MLS as a service area that extended from the urban areas to, rural farms. And I think that, you have to break down that perception of who you really are, because we were more than they thought, but respect their culture, because, what happens in the mountains is not the same thing that happens in the rest of our market. And so it's understanding their what's important to them. There's a difference on the merger side. I think you have to continue to have a presence with, especially politically and philanthropically, with that association. And so on the acquisition side, when we're acquiring MLS business from associations, I want to make sure that those associations stay healthy, because they need to be the ones really leading in that market area. They don't need the larger association that's part of the MLS coming in and doing government affairs. So we want to help them, but we don't want to do it for them necessarily.
Yeah, that the relational aspect at that level, when you're talking about philanthropic or advocacy related items, those are so relational. And you certainly, if you're coming from, like you said, AnneMarie, a larger entity to a smaller, I mean, I see this everywhere. It repeats itself. There's an 800-pound gorilla in every state. And a lot of times, the history of that, large entity from a political standpoint, broadly speaking, and, they have all these things, and the us versus them is so innate in like the general culture that when you try and introduce that into this, that's already overly personal and has a relational aspect, it really gets difficult to set aside that bigger understanding of big city or this community versus that community. They painted our rock back in 1976 during that high school thing. We're never coming together. Like, we laugh about that and I joke about it, doing consulting engagement, but there's that unspoken piece that does remain there. And I think you're all saying you almost have to push through it despite those things and then try and come together after the fact. How much of the idea of, because when we go in, we ask, what is it that you need from your potential partner? And what, always comes forward is we need transparency, we need trust, all of those things. How important are those things that we say are important? Are they when we really get into it? And how do you adhere to those items of transparency and trust when there are things, as Megan alluded to, where, this is maybe a little more important to us than others? And so how do you balance that out? And where have you seen it work best through your processes? You need to jump in, anyone on that one. Transparency and trust, how important is it, and how do you display it?
Yeah, and I think I would say that trust is crucial, and it's easier said than done. And again, in the merger or after a merger, you may have one side that may trust more in the association than another side. And again, that kind of happens when you've got two associations coming together and one may be used to doing business one particular way and the other one's used to their own culture. I think that trust is important because it's the fact of allowing having trust in the board of directors for the new association to allow the association to grow, having trust in the staff to be able to come together and be able to work together to put forth that strategic plan that association may have. Transparency, I think, is crucial, especially prior to any association acquisition or merger, of course, because the members are very, very, they're very personal to their association, especially those that are heavily involved, right? Those that are your career realtors and they're day in, day out working with the association on different levels of the leadership. They're always looking, well, why do we need to make a change? What's the need for a change if everything is working correctly now? And so in the vision with the board of directors and trying to get that vision of the next step out to the membership, that's part of that transparency that I think is so important on how and what's needed to get out. And then also trusting the directors, your staff, the AE to be able to pull everything together and move forward. But that takes time. That doesn't happen just because we've said it's working or just because we said it's happening, and I kind of just want to go back to what we were talking a little before. It takes time for a new organization, let's say past the merger, to go through its own successes and fails, in a sense, to really start to build a new identity. And I think with that time and with that new identity, you start getting more of the buy-in. Because the conversation that you have with one member or with one board or with one leader or with one president is different at every conversation point, because some leaders are really, really connected and some aren't. It's just a way of their leadership style. And so the conversations you need to have with them are individual. And again, it just takes time to go through your own successes, to go through your own failures, whatever that may be deemed as, so that you can come out of it as you build a new identity.
I really like
that
that
identity
too.
piece. Go ahead, Megan.
Oh, sorry. I think we do a good job of being transparent and building trust within the boards of the different associations, or if you're using a task force. But I think it needs, and I found this out particularly with our last one, that it needs to go one step further and be transparent with the membership before you get to time where it's a vote. There really needs to be conversations with the membership when the first conversations are starting or the idea has even been broached. So the membership feels like they're engaged in the process, that they're aware of it, that they can provide their feedback. We did lots of surveys with the membership. I was at, I think, every broker's office, so that they know that this isn't something that's being done by either board behind their back. And I think we were talking, what did you learn as you went through the different ones? And I think that was probably something most important, that it's sometimes easier to build the trust and transparency within the group who's actually doing the negotiation but that we really need to get out there to, particularly the one that's being acquired, the membership, so they know what's going on along the process and they don't just get this email that, hey, it's time to vote, and they haven't had a lot of time to provide a lot of feedback or ask their questions.
Now, that's an interesting one. I do want to touch quickly, Jorge or Georgie. Sorry, I'm from Colorado, so I know we've done this go around before. But the identity piece, that's so far down the road. Like, to me, that's the very end of that culture component, and that is like a 5-year thing. So to your point, like, it takes time. But Megan, I think your thing is really interesting to me because you're saying we need to get out there earlier. How did you all handle the communications? Because I think that is a tricky one where, there may be that want to be, transparent, but can your transparency, if done wrong, actually undo or hurt the effort? And yours sound like, again, as we're saying, everything is kind of different, but you said that you learned that the sooner the better. In some instances, is that not the case?
Well, and this may be the one advantage of being the CEO of both organizations, because I was already engaged with both memberships. I was already down there doing everything for both anyway. So it was easier for me probably to get out in front of their members than maybe if I hadn't been the CEO to come talk. But just to let them know that these were the conversations the two associations were having. It gave those members a great opportunity to ask me questions as far as what the new what NOR does. How do we handle this? What can we offer that they weren't getting down there? So it may have been a little unique, as every situation, like we talked about, is to ours, because I was the CEO of both. And so I could talk on behalf and had a better relationship. But we started pretty much as soon as we kind of stopped the shared service or went month to month on that at their first business meeting, having a conversation that these were what the two boards were looking at doing, and getting some feedback there, hearing their concerns. We did send out a survey to their members, kind of what they have their own forms, and knowing that we were going to be merging MLSs, what was important to them, what were their concerns. And I will tell you, going through all of that, some of their members a year and a half later still don't know that they merged.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm not kidding. Like, they're calling asking for the board. So even though you can do the best out there to communicate, to ask all that questions, at the end of the day, as we know, there's still 20% of members who have no idea what went on and still don't realize that they've even merged or that anything's different.
That's so true. AnneMarie, how did you handle that? Because that is a delicate dance of, the transparency, not just within the decision makers, but then at the membership level at large, or in particular when you start, dealing with MLSs, where now you're messing with their day to day.
Yeah. So we're slightly different, it sounds like, from the other two in that in all of our acquisitions on the MLS side, the associations were much smaller, substantially smaller. And so I approached it more from being sensitive to not making them feel pressured. They all came to us. So for the whole negotiation, every draft we sent, we put draft on it. And I insisted that it stay draft until they were totally comfortable. And the AE would come back and say, we need a membership vote, or the president would say, I need to do this. Fine, whatever, whenever you're ready. But we really took the approach with each one, which, again, like Megan said at the beginning, every single one was different. But what we said to them was, okay, if you're relying right now on MLS revenue for your association, you need to take a good hard look at what you're relying on, and then think about, what it would take over a 3-year period to wean yourself off that revenue and come back to us with your asking price. So we really put it on them to come back to us and try to be as flexible and, like you said, transparent, but we didn't have to go to our membership on the MLS acquisition side. They had to go to their membership. So anything we could do to support their communication with their members, we did. And like I said, on our association side, the merger was so small that our members had to vote, but they didn't really see why we were doing it or the advantages of doing it. And it was not a problem. So I think we, by keeping staff also in that area, when we acquired the Mountain MLS, we actually acquired 2 virtual staff. And so I think it gets back to that, in the end, the perception. If the perception is not much has changed, then you're not going to have a problem accepting it.
I think AnneMarie said a really key word that we haven't talked about, and that's flexible. And I think that's where some associations get stuck, that we're going to go in and it's got to be this way, or it's got to look this way because the last one looked that way. And I think going in kind of with a clean slate of, we're kind of, especially because we were a much larger association at the time too, we're kind of willing to do whatever you want to get this done within reason, obviously. But I think that almost more than anything, and that is both, if both associations can be flexible, makes it go a lot smoother.
One of the things that we advise when we're doing consulting work with folks around this is that, yes, we want the trust and transparency, but if we're going to communicate, especially externally, and we don't have the answers to the questions that might come back to us, that causes distrust. And so again, the transparency has to equate to additional trust, not distrust. And so I think that's one area where, again, it's kind of dependent. And it sounds like your situations were both fairly unique in that way, and that you probably had a lot of those answers made, in particular because you had intimate knowledge of both sides of the ledger. But that's kind of the careful thing, because there are a lot of people, especially in leadership, that will go in and say, well, what do the members think? And how do the members feel? And in many instances, to your point, they don't even know, let alone have that forethought of what's the leadership, what's the forethinking for not just today, but like in 3 and 5 years, how are we going to be best positioned? So there is that balance of just demonstrating leadership through these conversations versus being informed. And so Megan, you used the survey piece, and that's one that we always get a little nervous with as a consultant, that we not, ask questions like, do you want it or not want it? And I'm guessing in your instance, you were saying, well, how would you feel about these specific things, rather than an up or down vote before we even have an understanding of what it is? I
think we used it more of a general of what's important to you, the association. So very similar to like a normal, not even a merger, more of an association, because what we could provide of that association couldn't. So when we got those results back saying this is what's important, whether it's the communication or whether it's professional, whatever it was, that they were a 2-person office and we were larger, it helped us to make an argument of how we could present those members better. And we may have come out that said, we don't need anything else. And, this was, not worth it then. So
getting clear on the value proposition of the entities versus the expression of, we're entering into this dance. Should we do that?
Yeah.
I think that's a cautionary tale, because it happens a lot where, again, tentative leaders who don't want to make a bad decision and then ultimately be held accountable by the folks they sit in the office next to, I think, overreach and try and overly involve prior to having the right answers to the questions that are going to come forward. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges around the communications element and the transparency and trust, is that if you're going to involve more, you have to be prepared for the answer, or to answer the questions that come. And if you don't, it can be really detrimental. And I see you kind of agreeing with some of that, George.
Yeah. And we had talking points for each association so that the message was the same for each association. So when those board members were getting questions, they were giving consistent messages.
Yeah, you're right. Because it's not just about having an answer or answers, it's about having an answer.
Right.
and to that point, I just want to say that obviously falls into transparency. One of the things that we had done was have those talking points available for all our directors from both sides, so that the message is one, so that the responses are all the same, and it doesn't seem like there's one personal interest of one association over the other. I think the beauty of what Megan's case is that she was the CEO of both. So you were able to really help facilitate outbound to your membership and down the line, where that's not always the case. And I think that can obviously create a lot of issues in the communication and possibly in the message that gets out. One thing just that I'll say to that is getting the membership together prior to a merger and prior to the vote can pay good dividends in terms of getting the opt-in for the merger to move forward. One of the things that we had done previously was get both associations together for sort of like a cocktail networking type of event prior to the membership meeting that was set to happen, where the vote was set to take place, so that people can kind of just put a face to the name, right? Our members do business sometimes, and they may not even meet the other individual or the other broker on the other side of the deal. And all of a sudden they see the name and they're like, oh, we had this deal. And the connection just becomes more genuine and it becomes more real and in time, real time. And I think that really helps in solidifying that we are going to come as one. Again, it's a boots on ground, in my thought, type of campaign. You really got to push forward, because you have members that are not even aware of what the association may be doing, may not even care. And you have the other extreme where they're really committed to the association. They know exactly what the association is doing, but both of those members are still your members, right? And both of them have an equal right to know what's going on in that equal vote. But I will say, even to Megan's point, we have people, we're in year 2.5, year 3 now, and they still call or refer to one of the previous names of the association. And so, you got to stop at the top, right? From the board, from the staff, down all the way to the bottom. We call it our previous association. We do not even name those names anymore because we're trying to build a new tomorrow, a new association moving forward.
We've been talking about a lot of, go ahead, AnneMarie.
I'm going to add that I think the lack of transparency and the lack of communication are why that merger I told you happened back in '95 was such a disaster. Even though they had to have had a membership vote, the membership had no idea what was going on. So we learned from that and definitely participated in communication. And I think going to that other association and just meeting people in person helped kind of, everybody calm down that we're human too. And we were excited that they were interested. But I think you really have to have the support of the leadership. And I don't know, I think this is why it takes so long. You'll get a president of an association or an MLS that's all for a merger acquisition, and then their year's up and the incoming president's not. And so you're back to, okay, call me when you're ready, because it doesn't work unless there's buy-in from the leadership as well as the members.
That's another great point, AnneMarie, is the continuity piece around these is where these do often fall apart, is that we have such a tenuous leadership group, and it's largely on an annual basis, and these things don't happen in a calendar year. So setting up those trusted task groups that can be a conduit between the leadership changes is important, because there will absolutely be folks that come in post beginning of a merger conversation that then want everything, all the information. And what that ends up doing is either frustrating or taking you backwards. And so really being aware of the timing of your leadership cadence and how to bridge that is an important component to this being successful and not getting delayed. And so when you get into these conversations, one of the other things we advise on is getting to a really tight as possible meeting schedule. Not protracting out or getting it into a quarterly basis, because it takes, this isn't a one meeting type of opportunity from an internal negotiation standpoint. And so making sure that you're thinking through the longevity of this and bridging across those leaderships, folks, are important. And then, like you said, aligning different perspectives from the individuals who maybe sit in the largest chair and in many instances have the greatest influence on the outcome of these things. So those are all really delicate, and I think a contributing factor why we have so many folks that tell the origin story of, well, we've been talking about this for 2 decades, or we tried this 2 and 3 times and it failed. And so that's a great point that you bring up, and one that you have to absolutely think about it before going into these conversations. Any follow-up on that one? If not, I want to kind of, we've been talking about the rosiness and the kind of the fun things. There is some ugliness that comes along with this. There will be detractors. There will be those that would be purposely seeking to undermine the effort, whether that be, a key volunteer that just sees kind of their own legacy or something attached to it. Ultimately, a lot of staff conversations, because we are talking about folks' jobs, and so there are efforts to undermine these situations. And as much as we try to control messaging, there are others who might be trying to undermine that message. Any lessons or any experiences that you might share to help others work through that piece, because it is a really, really difficult, and it can be a really influential component of these conversations.
I would just say to that point, because we definitely ran into that sometimes it's important to remember too, that just because 3 or 4 voices tend to be the loudest, don't necessarily mean they're speaking for the entire group, whether that's the membership or whether that's the leadership team that's trying to put things together. So trying to balance that perspective is a challenge, but I think it's important, because I think we can listen to those couple loud voices thinking they're speaking for everyone, and then gets everything kind of sidetracked and derailed where everyone else seems to be on board. But we also started out early too, just talking about how we could get those members who are looking to see their legacy maybe be different, how we could bring them involved up in the association and putting those plans in place to begin with, so that they felt a little bit more comfortable, whether that was in writing or just kind of, again, with trust and transparency, making sure that they knew that they were going to be involved in the new version of the association as well.
AnneMarie or George, anything to add?
Yeah, I want to jump in on that. And I think it's two parts to the question that you really said, because one component is working with those leaders, board of directors, but then the other component is working with your staff. And when you have a merger coming in place, you have on the staff side, there's the question about the jobs. Well, there's already this position here, and then there's this position there. What's going to happen? There can't be two people for the same position. And when you're coming together, the lifeblood of the association is your staff, right? Your staff is the one that is putting together all the objectives and the vision from your board of directors, from the goals that they've set in place. The staff is helping facilitate the logistics of all that to get to that end goal. And in a merger, one of the things that I would say in looking back is additional communication is so important to the staff, so that they can understand that the reason we're coming together is not to cut down on resources or cut down on jobs, but it's to create a new entity that can provide more resources, more education, more tools, more and more of everything, which is going to require possibly even more staff, not a cut down of staff. The problem, though, that as you're going through the consolidation, the merger, is you don't have all the answers from day one, right? You don't know what that new organization chart may come out to be. You do not know what the new strategic plan, vision, goals are going to be coming out of that. That's part of that growth of the association, and that takes time. And so there's a trust and transparency that you also have to have with your staff, so that they are bought in, because it's important, equally important, for them to buy in on it as well. And it's easier said than done. I look back and I know I've probably had some faults in trying to get all this together, but you're also working at a mile a minute. Things are just happening so quickly sometimes that it's not that you're trying to forget about anything, but there is so much happening. You don't want to not say the wrong thing, of course, and you don't have the answer sometimes to give the proper answer. And sometimes you're just saying, we're going to get back to you. We're going to let you know. We're going to be putting things in place that are going to be helping everyone on the board, for the membership, for the staff. I think communication is my biggest message across that, and understanding that you're not going to have all the answers in day one. And you're not going to have all the answers rolling through.
You're not even going to have them in 5 years, to be clear. AnneMarie, what would you say to that one? Because it is it's not something you lead with, but it is something you have to give consideration of.
Yeah, so I gave a lot of thought to what we've learned, and I think what we have learned is that you've really got to grow intentionally, and you really have to be clear on the why you're doing what you're doing. And one of the things, and I think we do a pretty good job on the why with the entity we're acquiring and the brokers, that it's going to be more cost effective, address their pain points, better service, training, technology at a lower cost, whatever. They get it. To Jorge's point, we realized after the last year and a half, where we've kind of reassessing everything, that we really probably didn't explain the why well enough to our staff here. And so we realized, not only do you need to do a cost benefit analysis, you really need to do an impact analysis, because we didn't necessarily, I'm just going to say, know what we were doing, and we just did it. And it had an effect. It had an effect on all the departments, not just membership and MLS, but also marketing and HR. And from the merger standpoint, it's having an effect on the foundation and government affairs. And so you really got to think forward on the ripple effect internally and be prepared for that. And unfortunately, we grew by acquiring the Mountain MLS 20% overnight, and we weren't ready for that. We were using an antiquated system and processes that really caught us flat-footed, and we really have spent the last year and a half fixing that. And we intentionally said we're not even going to try and grow until we fix ourselves internally. So I think that's get a help moving forward, but we definitely had a hole to dig out of, and we've done it, and we're ready now. But lots of lessons learned, and you have to be open to the fact that there's probably gonna be more lessons we didn't even think about that we're gonna learn from.
Yeah, I love that piece that you're talking about. We didn't think through enough the why for the staff, nor the support processes behind that. And that is probably easy to overlook because you're thinking about how do we get the business deal done, or how do we get the vote through, and those things, and not thinking about that internal component. One of the things that I hear in terms of misinformation or misnomers or undermining, the concept, whether it be acquisition or merger in MLS, is this: well, we're inviting folks to come and sell on our market that have never been here before. That is like a huge impediment. And so for AnneMarie and Megan, because you involved MLSs here, what was your perception? Did that come up during, and what has it been like after? I think that it's the after that doesn't get talked about. It's always the what ifs that we focus on as an industry as a whole, let alone outside, directly when it comes to these types of conversations.
I think it was a bigger issue years ago, and I think it was, and obviously it's largely a perception issue, but honestly, the success of Bright MLS, when you can point to that and say, look, people from New Jersey are not selling in Maryland. It's not, you stick to your market area. Yes, you're going to have some crossover. Some people are going to go to the mountains and vice versa, but most people want and need to stay in the market area that they have the expertise, and they'll refer out, even if it's within the same MLS. So I'm hoping that for a large portion of the members, that perception has been broken down.
Yeah, I was going to actually say the same thing. That was a huge issue when we did the first merger in 2011, and it was a merger with a county like Antigua right next to us. And during that, I literally had someone say, I don't want so-and-so to come selling in our market. So that was a big issue. That was really not the case with the last couple that we did. And part of it's because now we're 45 minutes away to an hour. So I think the difference is there. But I think people are already seeing that happening regardless of the merger, given technology and the way things are. So that was much more of an issue 5-10 years ago. It did not come up in these last couple ones.
Yeah. So once you've kind of been through that experience, it kind of goes away. And again, I think sometimes that's one of those positioning pieces that causes people to respond emotionally. It is definitely, information that influences folks, how they view those things. And so again, I think we've found, and we've done not in-depth analysis of this, but our kind of, just high level outreach that we've done, that's not occurring. And in particular, I think, it doesn't occur when there is a referral based strategy, because that is one of the strengths of the association we forget about, is that we create these referral opportunities and relationships right through the association that allows us to hand off clients to others, because we know they'll be taken care of, and I think sometimes we forget about that value add that the associations can create even outside of the MLS mergers or I guess even amongst the MLS mergers that happen. I want to touch a little bit, we've talked a lot about the process, but so get beyond it and the culture piece that was alluded to earlier. And I'm a big believer that, when you're either restructuring, evolving, or significantly changing your culture, and obviously a merger or an acquisition significantly changes that culture, that it's a 3 to 5 year process. And it is a process, having that strategic focus, redefining what your processes are and how you can make those repeatable, and demonstrating the outcomes, building that trust before you even get to the idea of mutual passion being created amongst the leaders and the membership. And then, George, to your point, that identity component, that to me is the end of that, because to remove the us versus them, and we used to, and they did it this way, that is not an overnight piece. And so talk about things that helped with your components of that. And I know one of those can sometimes be the physical building, George, that you're going through. And I know our friends in Akron and Cleveland that I helped through their merger, that really solidified when they got a new building, right? It took the constraints, the billboards on the front that just got the change in the logo to now it's a completely different place. And so there are pieces and parts that come along the way that help you to define that new culture, not the us versus them, but it's not an easy one. Any examples that you all might have that you say, hey, this helped accelerate or address that idea of creating a new culture versus the old culture always being referred to?
We went through a rebranding process in 2019, well before the merger. And rebranded ourselves from Charlotte Regional Realtor Association and Carolina MLS to Canopy Realtor Association, Canopy MLS. We also have a real estate institute and our foundation. So we wanted unified branding. I'm not a marketing person, and honestly, at the time, I'm like, why? Okay, fine. But it really has helped not have the name Charlotte, even not have the name Carolinas in our name. It helps it be far less threatening to be part of us by having that name that really refers to the tree canopy in our region. So that's been a huge success for us. And I'm not sure I really anticipated how successful it would be in helping us.
I think that's huge. And it's also a really limiting factor. And again, the origins here coming through NAR, where they were basically like, your chapter needs to have some sort of regional like reference to it, drew these constraints, and it became, then by extension, the MLS serviced those areas. And we created these kind of false, borders because we were so geographic in the context of how we were branding and creating culture in our organization around that. So I think that's a great one to bring up, AnneMarie, and one that's hard to undo, especially when it's an association related one where we're so intent and used to, it has to have the name of the community on it. And still there's some NAR barriers to that in terms of getting the name through. I'm sure you can talk to that, AnneMarie. It's not easy to go outside of what the norm is in the naming, but it is so important. Megan, anything that you would add on that, or was there anything else that you did to kind of accelerate new culture creation?
Yeah, we went through a name change rebranding as well. We were Toledo Regional Association of Realtors, now Northwest Ohio, just because of that kind of same thing. We don't want to be just Toledo as a region. And I will say all the great plans we had in place to kind of bring this together, and George can probably say the same thing, unfortunately, are just starting to happen now. And I was hoping they were going to happen in January of 2020. But a lot of that is we have a building down in that area as well. So doing continuing education classes in that area, just so not so much. I mean, eventually we'd like to have everyone coming up here, but realizing that, an hour drive versus a 15-minute drive is very different, especially in this business right now. So that they don't feel forgotten about, don't feel like we have changed too much on them, making sure that we're still doing events down there, making sure that we're still reaching out to them when it comes to government affairs and candidate interviews. So our goal was really to get down there and do broker meetings and events kind of on a monthly basis, just to make sure we could be answering questions and introducing ourselves. And like I said, unfortunately, that didn't happen. But that really is the plan. So the more they see us, the more likely they are to come up here. We had an event here the other day and, tried to bring a load of them up here. So again, they could kind of come as a group and get involved that way. So we're playing with a lot of different things, but I mean, hopefully the name change a little bit helped just so that we all started from something scratch. It was new to everyone.
Yeah, there's still that spatial component to this though, right? Like when you have to go somewhere, like you were saying up here or down there, there's still that spatial component to it, which in some ways should be an accelerant that we have received over the last couple of years, is that we can come together more in a virtual environment and maybe less specific, but I don't think we can eradicate the idea of the footprint of the building, right, George? I mean,
it becomes hard too when 70% of your members live in one little area. I mean, do you ask your 70% to go the hour, or it just, there's really no good answer to it.
Yeah. And I want to say, like, for us, we are essentially still working out of two campuses, right? The previous association X and Y had their own office locations. And since 19, which was year one of the new association, we started to look at a new facility, but then of course, COVID happened. So we're really excited to be now towards the end of the construction of our new headquarters, where we will be taking both campuses and now coming under one roof, where all staff will be together, because the biggest thing for us is even the staff right now has been working out of two locations. I think COVID, of course, obviously threw a huge wrench in everyone's system. And then we had hybrid during those times. But now, as well as we're looking to get into the new building, I think that's going to help us really sort of create this new identity. And one of the things that we look at is this identity conversation. This is a daily thing for us, because we're looking to have new events. We're looking to put together new types of resources, in a sense, in a new headquarters, in a new building, where everyone can start to come together and start to create, again, new type of projects, share new experiences. All that, I think, is going to be part of that identity build that's going to ultimately help help us and help the membership understand, all right, no, they're no longer X or Y, they're GBR.
Yeah, it's
I
a
think,
difficult
oh, sorry,
transition.
That's right. I'm kind of thinking that in an opposite direction of you two right now, because the association we acquired sold their building because they want to use those funds toward affordable housing. But I think we're going to find that the members are missing having a place, because as somebody said a couple weeks ago, the association's social. MLS is just a service we're buying, but the association is kind of the heart. So I think we need to go, at least here, the way of some satellite offices, because especially, I mean, the mountain area is 2 to 3 hours away from here. It's not just, a 45-minute drive, but I do think that having that place for members to gather is going to come back once we can be and in place. So.
Yeah,
and I was
there's
just going to say
so many
too,
nuances to it.
to George's
ahead.
point about the staff trying to communicate, it's really helpful too when the membership, especially those that were part of the transition team or who are now part of the new board of directors, can take it back and speak to the agents in their office or speak to the membership, because as everything, a lot of times if it comes from the broker, if it comes from other agents, it's more receptive than if it comes from the actual association. And that's a lot of what we're encouraging our members to do as well, is to be the voice, because we can only be so vocal at this point.
So we could talk about this for 3 hours. The complexity from the personal connection to the legalities that are so difficult around this. But at the end of the day, that there's value that can come from these exercises. And so as a kind of a closing question here, I'm curious to have you share what's something that was unexpected to even you that really emerged from this. You're like, wow, that was something that we couldn't even have contemplated, or having gone through this before, I didn't even know. But what's something that was unexpected that really added value for either you as an executive or even for your members and subscribers? Something unexpected.
COVID.
But there was a benefit or a value, something that you were like, man, I didn't even see that, but that's so cool.
I'll say something. And for me, it's been the outreach component of meeting new brokers, meeting new people, new leaders that are buying into this new association, and really connecting with them and realizing that there are more of your members out there that do want more and can really work with you to help push this along, that you're not in it alone, right? That you guys are all in on the same team, which is obviously all the people that you're working with and all your leaders, but uncovering new talent and tapping into new resources from brokers you didn't even realize, they didn't come out because they maybe were jaded by the previous association for some reason or another, and now they're giving it a second shot because they know the industry's changing. So to me, it's really been the ability to have new relationships, which has been great with more of our members, obviously, as we cover more territory now, but then also tapping onto new talent, which I think is crucial for the future of not just our industry, but our association, and for as things continue to develop. I think that it wasn't something that I was thinking about, it wasn't even on my radar. And just as a genuine answer, it's something that just, I just think back of some of the new relationships and conversations and ideas and brainstormings I've been having with some of the new individuals that are part of our board now.
Well, that's a cool one. AnneMarie or Megan, anything?
Well, I would add, I totally agree with what George said, but also in prepping for this and looking at all we've accomplished, really looking at the fact that, as I said earlier, we didn't necessarily know what we were doing, but our staff work group did it. We figured it out, and they all had other jobs to do. And this takes up a lot of time, whether you're going through an acquisition or a merger, and it takes up time from their other jobs, but we all figured it out. So that was, very refreshing to realize we've got a great team. We kind of built the plane as it was flying, but we've learned enough lessons that I think we're really ready to move forward.
So kind of some of those internal talents that expose themselves through this.
Definitely.
That's cool. Megan?
I feel, and we joke about COVID about everything, but I do feel like, it's pushed this all back 18 months. And so we're just starting to see some of those glimmers right now. But simple things, just seeing from an association that didn't have a lot of RPAC involvement, to now watching the percentage of their members getting involved, or starting to see some of those members hit some of our Zoom meetings, and just seeing that it's starting to grow. The common themes around community service, and we can all do a food drive, but we can do different food banks in each of our areas, and kind of, so starting to just see some of those synergies come together, I think kind of gives you a little glimpse of hope that when things go back to, we can get back doing normal, that it may not be quite as painful to get there as it maybe we thought it would be.
Yeah, there'll be unexpected challenges throughout the formation and then the delivery of it, but it's good to know that there are unexpected benefits and values that show themselves too. Well, thank you all for taking the time, and I'm sure folks might have questions. If they want to reach out to any one of you, I'm sure you're pretty happy to answer any questions they might have.
Thank you.
Well, I enjoyed it, and I don't think we did anything that anyone's going to yell at us for. So I better probably just sign off now before I do that, and then Stefan has to come after me. So thank you all for your time. Super appreciate it. Thanks to those that tuned in. We'll make this recording available and send it back out to all who registered for it. Feel free to share, and if you do have any questions, feel free to contact myself at T360 as well. So with that, enjoy your Thursday, and we'll talk to you all soon. Take care.
Thank
Thank
you
you so much, everybody. Stay safe.